This is Land of Havilah, Leviticus 12. Continuing on the subject of clean and unclean, verse 1. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a woman conceives and bears a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her monthly period she shall be unclean. Comment, Yahweh hasn't addressed the monthly period yet, but he will in chapter 15. We'll find out there that a woman was unclean for 7 days following the start of her menstrual cycle, assuming the flow stopped within that time. She didn't have to do anything to become clean again except just wait it out. If her discharge was prolonged or irregular, there was more waiting, and at the end, after prolonged flow, she should bring a bird for sin offering and another for burnt offering. During times of discharge, any person who touched her seat, or her bed was unclean until evening. So for practical purposes, everyone in the house was unclean for 7 days every cycle, unless they were strictly careful not to touch her bed, or anything she sat on. So what were the consequences of being unclean again? An unclean person couldn't approach the holy, which meant no going into the gate of the court, Leviticus 12:4, or partaking of the meat of a sacrifice, Leviticus 7:20. So if someone were planning on a holy activity, he or she had to be careful around women starting a little bit ahead of time, and careful around men as well, because men could be unclean. Not to mention he or she who wanted to participate in a holy activity had to be careful of defilement in other ways, such as by touching an unclean dead creature or even a dead insect. So basically, to be ceremonially clean, a person had to isolate himself and not touch anyone in public, because more often than not, a random person was in a state of defilement for one reason or other. We might imagine the practical result of this was that Israelites tended to practice social distancing more than other cultures. In verse 2 we just read, a woman was unclean for 7 days after giving birth to a boy. Then, verse 3, in the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall continue in the blood of purification 33 days. She shall not touch any holy thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying are completed. Comment, so after giving birth to a boy, she was unclean for 7 days, and for 33 more days she was, quote, in the blood of purification, end quote. During the 33 days, it seems her uncleanness wasn't transferable to anyone else. But as for herself, she shouldn't touch anything holy, verse 4 says, which would be the meat of a sacrifice, Leviticus 7:20, nor could she come into the sanctuary, which means enter the gate of the court. Mary and Joseph observed this statute in Luke 2:23. When Mary's days of purification were complete, they went to the temple. Coming up, the days of purification were longer in the case of a female birth, verse 5. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her period, and she shall continue in the blood of purification 66 days. Comment, for a boy she was unclean 7 days, and impure 33 days, for 40 days total. And for a girl all the days were doubled, such that she was unclean 14 days, and impure 66 days, for a total of 80 days. Why was it double for a girl? The text doesn't say. Certainly neither the mother nor the child did anything to account for the difference, and there's no suggestion here that they did. Paul said, quote, now I know in part, but then I'll know fully, end quote, so we don't have all the answers right now. One thing we can say, the world was very good, the way Yahweh put it, before the fall of Genesis 3, and corrupt afterward. Beforehand, it seems there was no bloodshed. Men didn't eat animals, animals didn't eat each other, childbirth was painless, or there was very little pain in it. But then sin corrupted the world. The concept of clean and unclean might more than anything be a reflection of Yahweh's intense awareness that the world isn't what it should be. Simultaneously, the concept of clean and unclean brings home the message to man that one day God will restore the world to its original state of goodness. The lion will lie down with the lamb, etc. There'll be no more corruption or uncleanness. Coming up, after the days of purification, the mother should bring a sin and burnt offering to the tabernacle, verse 6. When the days of her purification are completed for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the door of the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering, and he shall offer it before Yahweh and make atonement for her, and she shall be cleansed from the fountain of her blood. This is the law for her who bears, whether a male or female. If she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. Comment, after any childbirth, boy or girl, the mother shall bring a lamb for burnt offering and a bird for sin offering. Or if money was tight, it could be 2 birds in verse 8. Mary and Joseph brought 2 birds, so money must have been tight. In verse 7, the priest will make atonement for the mother by means of the sin and burnt offerings. The mother didn't sin by bearing a child, but like everyone else, she sinned at some point in some way or other. Psalm 51:5, quote, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me," end quote. Her sacrifices at the end of her purification were her one chance to bring sin and burnt offerings without anyone whispering about her. Leviticus 13's next.